Texas A&M with an opportunity this weekend at Kyle Field to make a statement nationally to the college football world when they host the Missouri Tigers. Helping us break down that game and much more, talking all things Aggies with David Nuño of TexAgs. He joins the show once again. David, what's going on, my friend? Appreciate you taking the time.
Mr. Phillips, appreciate your time, buddy. I enjoy coming on your show all the time.
Absolutely. So, David, let's just dive right into it, right? Texas A&M currently sitting at 4-1, but 2-0 in the conference. You know, there was the highly anticipated season opener against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. A&M falls in that one. Connor Wigman sustains the injury. Marcel Reed slides in at quarterback. And correct me if I'm wrong, David, it almost feels like A&M sort of been flying under the radar a little bit. Got some nice wins, obviously, in Gainesville against Florida. Just beat Arkansas in the Southwest Classic in Arlington. Just talk about what you've seen from this football team with the two conference wins, and especially Marcel Reed at quarterback and the evolution of the offensive side at this point.
So I see a team that's growing, and maybe not growing at the rate that I want, because I want to be 12-0 and be a playoff contender, and potentially with the way their schedule plays out, I mean, that's a conversation you can have maybe in a month. But they're growing in the right way. They have if you would have asked me some of the biggest question marks that I have for this season, I would say to you that, coming in, the offensive line, how are they going to do, and how does the secondary look? So let's answer and special teams too. So let's kind of answer those. Offensive line is significantly improved from what we saw last year and the year prior. Significantly improved. I wouldn't say elite, but I've said really, really good. Okay, so you got that. Secondary, better than last year. Good, give up big plays. Okay, so that's where they are there. I also would have said, can you keep your quarterback healthy, right? And unfortunately, Connor Wigman, who had a reputation coming into this season that he was a often hurt quarterback, which really wasn't the truth, starts this season not only with a bad performance, but dings up his shoulder. It shows up again in McNeese, and you haven't seen him since. So, look, things are trending in a good direction, and they control a lot of the cards as long as they continue to grow. The Florida game, to me, was, I thought, like, okay, here we are. They figure it out. They know they can run on teams. But then they had a close game against Bowling Green. They had a game where offensively they looked poor against Arkansas until the fourth quarter. That was a game that, they scored some points early to make you feel like they had a chance. But it really wasn't until the fourth quarter where, like, it started to click. You could run at will, and you were connecting down the field. So, long way of answering your question. I think they're trending in the right direction. I want to see more because I'm impatient, but they're probably going at the right speed, if you will, for a coach who's trying to set his culture, get his players right, and also try to maneuver through an offense that's having some growing pains.
David, just looking at the schedule on paper, again, A&M hasn't allowed more than 20 points in a contest this season. Mike Elko, his calling card, the defensive side of the football. What have you seen from that side that you like? I feel like every single week we're talking about that Texas A&M front seven, both of the Shamars, Nick Scorton, Torian York, those guys making an impact. What have you seen? You mentioned the secondary, obviously, that was the question, but what have you seen from the defensive side that's encouraged you? And, Mike Elko obviously living up to his calling card of being a defensive mastermind.
Well, here's a couple things I've seen. First off, the defensive line was playing well early on, but they weren't great. They weren't causing the havoc that I expected. 5 sacks against Notre Dame. I know that's an outrageous number, but they were coming in with such a young offensive line, inexperienced, and I expected a Kyle Field. We've been thinking about this game for 9 months. We'd be living in the backfield. We didn't see that. Notre Dame had a great game plan. Get rid of the ball quickly. McNeese had that same game plan. Get rid of the ball quickly. You start seeing other things happen. The Florida game, you started seeing it kind of open up. Bowling Green, a little bit opened up. Then against Arkansas, right? Taylon Green, what is he good at? He's good at eluding pressure, being slippery and super fast. And he'd certainly burned A&M a few times. But they were living in the backfield all game long. That's why you saw Nick Scorton with 2 sacks. That's why you saw the team overall with 3 sacks. That's why you saw the 3 turnovers. So I kind of paint that picture of a defense that hasn't completely figured it out either, but they are absolutely trending in the right direction. Why I think the offense might be, I know the defense is. And again, one of the things you're going to see a lot from teams that face A&M, right, is you're going to see them get rid of the ball quickly. This weekend against Missouri, what does Brady Cook like to do? He likes to get rid of the ball quickly. I think one of the fastest in the entire country at getting rid of the ball. So they're not allowing the defensive line to be able to be the force that you want, and that's really good X's and O's. But the flip side of that is, how does A&M tackle in the open field? And they've been really good at tackling in the open field. So if they can do that against Missouri and some others in the future, and Brady Cook might, he gets rid of the ball quickly. But if his reads aren't there and you give, Nick scored in a second or two, he's going to live there.
David, let's switch gears to the offensive side of football. The big conversation surrounding the quarterback position. You mentioned earlier Marcel Reed or Connor Wigman. And a lot of people have asked the question, when do you reinsert Connor Wigman when he's 100% healthy? Do you start him in a game? Do you work him in? Do you continue to let Marcel Reed operate until he gives you a reason to pull him? Where do you fall on that? Because I've heard it many times. I'm sure you have as well. Most feel like Marcel Reed is actually a better fit for what Colin Klein wants to do schematically. At the same time, many folks will tell you they think Connor Wigman's the overall better quarterback. So how do you handle the quarterback position, David, moving forward? Do you continue to ride the hot hand of Marcel Reed, or do you find a way to get Connor Wigman involved, or maybe even start him in a game in the future?
I'm the wrong person to ask, because in the game I'm emotional. And during the game, I'm like, I think we need Connor Wigman. And then the fourth quarter happens. I think Marcel Reed is the answer. The actual real answer is he knows what's happening at practice. Coach Elko saw everything that happened in the spring, everything that happened in fall camp. He knows how this week's practice is going. So whatever decision he makes, I think it's going to be in the best interest of the team. I personally think that Connor Wigman's story is not written yet. One bad game. You could say he's had a couple other bad games, but really one really bad game against Notre Dame. And for the most part, he had a couple rough outings against Auburn in his, 10 starts. But he's been really good as well. I've seen Connor Wigman in his first start against Ole Miss light it up as a freshman. So if you get somewhere in between the Notre Dame game and maybe some of his highs, and you get that quarterback, I think Connor Wigman can be that top 6, 7 quarterback that we all envisioned. But you're winning with Marcel Reed right now. Now, the offense did not move the ball in the second and third quarter. They did not move it at all. It was just punt after punt after punt, right? And luckily, Tyler White is an excellent punter, special teams player of the week. But they were not moving the ball. What changed in the fourth quarter, though, is a couple things. I think the way A&M runs the ball does wear down a defense. That's part of the story. And also the way they use Marcel Reed in the fourth quarter, allowing him to get out, move with his legs a little bit, because, Arkansas did a brilliant job of keeping him in the pocket. Getting him on the move a little bit, completing a couple of quick passes to Noah Thomas, allowed for other things to open up, which allowed Le'Veon Moss to have that 90-yard fourth quarter. As for those who say that Connor Wigman or Marcel Reed's a better fit from Colin Klein, how do we know? Right? Like, honestly, we don't know, because all I've heard from Colin Klein is he'll adjust his offense based on the skill set that he has. So technically, because of what Colin Klein has done with Marcel Reed through the first few games and what he did at Kansas State, makes you think, well, this is a better fit. Probably, potentially. But we don't know, because what we've seen is a Connor Wigman come back from injury and look bad against a pretty good defense, right? He wasn't, I don't think, mentally ready for that game. And also, maybe physically, he just didn't feel as good as he could. His story's not over yet. I think A&M's in a really good position that if they start Marcel Reed, which probably I would lean towards that, if the offense isn't moving and Connor's ready to go and has had practice all week long, you can switch it up. And if you decide to go with Connor, you can always go back to Marcel. I don't like having two quarterbacks. I guess my point is, we've seen a lot from Marcel, and he can only keep getting better. That's my opinion on his situation. His stock will continue to rise. Connor Wigman, too many people allow the Notre Dame game to be the story of the Connor Wigman experiment or experience. And I don't think that is the case either. So I'm of the opinion, let Marcel do his thing for now, and let Connor get completely healthy. And when Connor is completely healthy, if that is Missouri, let's see what he can do.
So, David, you mentioned that Missouri game. Let's move into that, a high-profile matchup, the only ranked-on-ranked matchup this weekend in college football, a top 10 opponent in the Missouri Tigers, certainly an opportunity for Mike Elko to get that signature win, right, David? You mentioned that, this season, it's been a pretty good one thus far for A&M, but there hasn't been that moment, I think, that everybody in College Station is looking for. You're going to get the opportunity on Saturday. David, from what you've seen from Missouri, what stands out to you specifically? Obviously, again, their last 2 games before the bye week, struggled with teams like Boston College and went to double overtime with Vanderbilt. But what do you see from Missouri that maybe gives you some concern? And what are some things you see that maybe are areas of opportunity for Texas A&M to expose and take advantage of?
All right, I'm going to be an actual analyst and not an emotional fan when I say this, right? Missouri is going through some of the bumps and pains that I think a lot of teams in college football are going through, right? Like, people are expecting these top 10 teams to run through other teams and forgetting this is the SEC. And I know that the close game against Vandy and the Boston College. Vandy is considered typically the bottom of the SEC. Boston College rebuilding with Bill O'Brien there. But I guess my point is, there's a reason Georgia had a close game against Kentucky. There's a reason that Ole Miss lost, right? Ole Miss lost to Kentucky and Kentucky lost to South Carolina. There's a reason that you can't necessarily predict all these games, and maybe Texas and Mississippi State are a little tighter for 2.5 quarters than expected. It is life in big boy college football, and with so many transfers and young players playing now, you don't really have a full grasp of your team as early as I think you used to have. I think Missouri offensively doesn't look like the same Missouri team that they were last year, yet they're averaging, 36.5 points per game. Defensively, I look at them and I'm like, man, those numbers really look good. Top 10 in the country type of numbers. But who have they played offensively? They played Vanderbilt. They played Boston College. Who else did they have on their schedule? Buffalo, Murray State. So you look at some of the games like, well, those numbers are a little bit inflated. I think Missouri is in that second tier of really good SEC teams. You got that top tier, you got Missouri. And this is the kind of game that they can knock on the door and be welcomed into that club of those elites, right? Not that beating A&M makes them elite, but when you look at their schedule, this is probably their second toughest game on their schedule, right? So you look at it, this is an opportunity for a top 10 Missouri team to actually be like, look, guys, we just beat A&M at Kyle Field. They were ranked when we did it, and we don't have a lot of hard games the rest of the way, so let's get past Alabama or at least survive Alabama and kind of revisit it. I look at them as a team that can run the ball really well. Luther Bird and Theo Weiss, those are guys you got to watch out for. Brady Cook is sneaky fast as well. So there's certain things that this offense can do that can cause a lot of problems. I'm interested what they look like on the road for the first time this year. Coming off a bye week, which is very helpful, but I know that Kyle Field isn't what it was in the 90s when it comes to the home field dominance that you've seen. It is still an intimidating place to come play at. Not saying that Missouri is going to be intimidated at 11 a.m., but my point is it's still a hard place to come play because even through A&M's all these struggles that they've had with coaching malpractice across the street, with so it's just some quarterback after quarterback getting hurt. These games have all come down to the last couple of minutes. All of them. You look at last year, they all came down to a play or two in the fourth quarter. And it's starting to play out that way again. The Notre Dame game for A&M, at Kyle Field, by the way, was a 10-point loss, but that game was tied with less than 2 minutes left, right? That came down to A&M not being able to stop the big run by Notre Dame. You look at the Arkansas game. That was a tight game until it wasn't. They were trailing in the fourth quarter, and it was tight at the end. But A&M's dominance made it, defensive dominance and the ability to run the ball changed it. So what I think of this game is, if A&M really is the team that I saw against Arkansas, a team that can take over a fourth quarter, because they did not take over the fourth quarter against Missouri. They did not take over the fourth quarter against Bowling Green. But if they take over in the fourth quarter like we saw against Arkansas at Kyle Field, then I think A&M can come out of this and look at their schedule just like Missouri and be like, man, I see a lot of W's potentially in the future. But it is the SEC and it is A&M, so I always say that with a little caution.
David, on that point, I did see the conversation that you and Billy Lucci were having earlier, I think maybe on yesterday's show, or maybe this morning at the time of us chatting, about not just what this win would mean, but what lies ahead for Texas A&M if they're able to secure the win. I mean, games against Mississippi State, LSU, South Carolina, New Mexico State, Auburn, Texas. Again, like you mentioned, it's the SEC. You take nothing for granted, right? It's you got to go through, play that slate. You never know what can happen, but you look at the A&M schedule. This is probably the second toughest game, depending on what you think about LSU, but probably the second toughest game you have left outside of that Texas game at the end of the year. So, I want to ask you, David, in a vacuum, what would this win mean for Mike Elko in year one of his tenure to beat a top 10 opponent at home? And then also, what would it mean for the long term of, it's hard, and we can do this as fans and as analysts and what have you, David, to start kind of schedule peaking and be like, hey, all of a sudden, you're 3-0 in SEC play. The path is clear to potentially make a big-time run and have a season that many folks were dreaming of before the year started in College Station.
So I have a hard time sometimes looking at one win against a ranked team and letting it take you to another area, because I saw A&M struggle in 2021 early, then beat Alabama, then beat Missouri, and you felt like there was a path to get them to Georgia. And then they dropped their last two games, right? So they ended up going 8-4 as opposed to 10-2. And those were 2 games that had a chance in the fourth quarter. LSU, they were winning with 2 minutes left. So I have a hard time saying one game can be the trajectory piece, but what it does do is open up that dialogue, right? I've seen A&M lose at Mississippi State too many times, and I don't care what their record is. I've seen them as a top 10 team lose there. I've seen them as a favorite lose there, and I don't care what the situation is. That's not a place that is an easy place to win, okay? At least for A&M. So I don't take anything for granted. But if you do play that game that you're saying, Mississippi State should be a win. LSU, look, I'm never going to say that any, legendary program like LSU, a team with multiple national championships, should be a win. But A&M has played them well at Kyle Field the last 3 times, right? So there is that part to talk about. The last few times they played them, they played very well and they've won those games. I'm not saying that they should win. I'm saying I would like their chances under that scenario because it is Kyle Field, because those games have gone A&M's favor, and I'm not sure about LSU just yet. The question would be, can A&M keep up with the scoring that LSU does? And I don't know if they have the offense to do that. But the defensive part is interesting. So then you look at that and you keep looking like, well, South Carolina, another place I've seen A&M lose on the road. I saw A&M not very good, go down 17-0 in the first quarter a couple years back, and had a chance to win at the end, but couldn't do it. And that's when Connor Wegman came in the game in the fourth quarter and gave a little hope. So I just look at it like, I hate to say this, the analyst in me can project all these wins, but I look at the SEC and I was like, man, yeah, you should, based on what we know today. But what we know today doesn't always translate to tomorrow, right? And I need to see what I've seen from Marcel Reed, if he is the guy who continues on as the quarterback, continual growth, right? I need to see, he won a game this past weekend without using his legs. That's impressive. The offense was, a little stale for a while, but it was impressive that they found a way to win. I would have told you A&M's going to beat Arkansas, but he's only going to have 10 yards rushing, you'd be like, really? That's how it. But then conversely, but A&M's defense stopped Arkansas from running. Jaquindon Jackson had 38 yards, and this guy had been coming in, leading the SEC. So if A&M can do what they do well, which is stop the run the ball well in the fourth quarter, and you do have a chance to beat Missouri, the rest of those games I then think don't look as daunting, but you cannot take any of those games for granted. And I'm not taking LSU for granted, by the way. I am not. I'm saying I can see a scenario where they should win, but it's freaking LSU who finds a way to win 9 or 10 games anyway.
So, David, again, zeroing in on this Missouri game, path to victory for the Aggies, what are the things, or maybe there's a specific key to the game you've got that Texas A&M will need to accomplish to pull off this top 10 win?
Both teams are known for giving up big plays, right? Missouri's given up 1 or 2 big plays a game. That's how teams score on them. A&M has given up 1 or 2 big plays a game. The Arkansas game, they scored 2 touchdowns on big plays. A 73-yard touchdown, 3rd and 11. They almost had Taylor Green in the backfield. Nick Scorton was a second away from grabbing him. He throws it. They score a long touchdown. The Tesla scores it, right? They also have a punt return that puts, a fake punt that puts them in scoring position and keeps that drive alive where they end up scoring. Big plays have hurt A&M. They've got to limit the big plays because after those big plays, A&M gave up 3 points. That all happened in the first quarter. If that A&M team shows up defensively, and then you can, move the ball down the field with some passing. I'm not saying that Marcel Reed or Connor Wegman or whoever has to be Joe Montana. What I'm saying is keep the defense honest, because what defenses have done the last few weeks, at least with Marcel Reed at quarterback, is they're putting 8 in the box. And it's taking a long time for the running game to get going. It finally got going against Arkansas. You just don't want to be playing from behind doing that.
David, one last thing, and I'll get you out of here. I'm curious. I'm not sure how big of a gambling guy you are, but I do want to get your take on this. Texas A&M opens as a favorite in this football game, and I believe they still sit as a 2-point favorite. Again, actually at 2.5 now over a top 10 Missouri team. Does that mean anything to you that the Aggies are getting that respect nationally? Because, again, I know a lot of folks were maybe a little bit surprised to see Missouri as the underdog at Kyle Field.
Doesn't mean anything. They were favored to beat Notre Dame to week 1. So, if A&M does what I think to me, that's based on if A&M plays the brand of football that we saw them play against Florida and we saw them do in the fourth quarter, really for a big chunk of the game against Arkansas. If they can move the ball, I think they win by more than the 2.5. Can they move the ball? Is Missouri's defense as good as those numbers say? Something tells me they're not. But again, like, it's very hard to project. You look at Bowling Green one week, like it's a close game, then they lose the next week, right? Like, and you look at Notre Dame, they beat you, then the following week they lose, right? So I just think A&M needs to take care of their business, and if they take care of their business, they'll win by more than 2.5. And that's not a shot at Missouri. I just think if A&M lives up to their potential, let me rephrase that, lives up to what I think their brand of football is. It's not about potential. It's their brand of football is own the line of scrimmage on both sides. If they can own the line of scrimmage, then I think that's a great number. If they don't own the line of scrimmage, which, by the way, for the most part, they have, for the most part, I don't know if I can say that about the Notre Dame game, but for the most part, they've owned the line of scrimmage. If they do that, then I think that's a good number.
David Nuño of TexAgs does a fantastic job talking all things Aggies, he and the entire TexAgs crew. David, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Appreciate you taking the time. Let's definitely do this again soon.
Hey, and when you're in College Station, we're hanging, all right?
Oh, hey, absolutely. We'll let you know in a couple weeks.
All right, man. Thanks, Chris.